We all like to think that we are good doctors. And if I'm thought to be a good doctor, it's because of the Osler service.
In the matter of resident physicians and interns, these men should, as now, be salaried. They should be selected with the greatest care. We should select men indifferently from the entire country, wherever we can hear of a superior man who wishes to do scientific hospital work. I hold that it should be distinctly understood from the outset that this is not an ordinary hospital. William Osler.
Before Johns Hopkins was established, hospitals in America were places where poor people came to die. And when Johns Hopkins established a university, a medical school, and a hospital, it was the first time that you had smart people of goodwill committed to healing and using science to combat suffering.
The early residents, like their successors, were men of high competence, sound training, and outstanding personal qualities. Long tenure was the rule. Thayer, who graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1889, was assistant resident physician for 1 year, and then resident physician for 7 years. The pearl of the residency system has been the public wards, known since 1931 as the Osler Medical Service. This was the only resident staff in the Department of Medicine until 1915, when a separate resident staff for the private service was initiated. The latter was known for many years as the Marburg Service. Victor McKusick.
My intern year, I lived in one of the large rooms on the 3rd floor of the administration building. I shall never forget my first patient. Patient admissions were light, and it was almost 2 weeks before a new patient was admitted, with intestinal bleeding due to a syphilitic ulceration of the bowel. To illustrate the primitive state of therapy in those days, we did the daring thing of giving him a subcutaneous infusion of saline. Every year of my assistant residency, there was an epidemic of meningococcal meningitis. During the Depression, nutrition was poor among the East Baltimore residents, and cases of pellagra were common. We had very little in the way of therapy. All we could do for patients with bacterial endocarditis was to give supportive therapy and see them through the various embolic events that took place before death. Mac Harvey.
In my solitude.
The growth of the subspecialty divisions had, in some other institutions, resulted in a complete loss of the tradition of the general internist. Hopkins, however, was extraordinarily fortunate to have outstanding generalists as leaders. This started with Dr. Harvey, whose skill and judgment in differential diagnosis covered the entire range of internal medicine. Richard Roadheffer.
The character of the chief residency changed significantly in the 1950s and 60s, and the job of the recent residents has become at least twice as big as 25 years ago. The house staff and the number of inpatients have more than doubled in size. And with the shortened average length of stay, the chief resident has been unable to spend as much time at the bedside as previously. His job has become a particularly hectic one, less satisfying to him and a less satisfactory preparation for a major role in academic medicine. Victor McKusick.
We had 2 services in those days. We had the Osler service, which was very popular. Students and house staff loved it. Then we had the Marburg private service, which wasn't doing well at all. It was hard to get anyone to work there. So Dr. Harvey asked me, could I take it over and see what we could do with it? We passed a rule that no visiting physician could leave an order on a patient without going through the house staff first. Then we picked out some of the best teachers, like Ben Baker and Ward Allen, and set up ward rounds that were exactly like those on the Osler ward service. Philip Tumulty.
Three shortcomings of the program became evident as the 1960s progressed. First, the Osler program suffered from lack of exposure to the part-time faculty who admitted many patients to Marburg. Second, House officers had relatively little contact with the research specialty divisions. Third, socioeconomic changes after World War II narrowed the spectrum of clinical problems seen among Osler patients. Victor McKusick.
In response to these shortcomings, there were 3 modifications of the training program made in 1970-71. One was to add a 3rd year of residency. It had typically been just 2. The second was to have the senior residents rotate on the new specialty services and learn the best organ-oriented science. And the third was to combine 2 historically separate services, the Osler service with the Marburg service.
Dr. Tumulty and Dr. McKusick had been talking a lot about how to reorganize the Osler Medical Service to meet some of the challenges that were being posed by some external forces, not the least of which was healthcare reimbursement.
So they were senior people, but they were house staff. And they were technically the attending physicians, but because they were house staff, there was no way they could charge a professional fee. So the economics were one of the drivers of the new system, actually.
It is intended that on July 1, 1975, 4 services will be created and designated as firms. Each firm will be headed by a junior faculty member whose experience and competence are comparable to those of our present chief residents. The title will be Assistant Chief of Service.
Dr. McKusick greeted me and escorted me into his office. He said, "Please sit down." We shook hands. He said, "Please sit down." I said, "Thank you." He said, "I'd like you to be an ACS next year." I said I'd be honored to be an ACS next year. He said, "Thank you for coming in."
Each ACS will serve for 2 years, so that on the 1st of July each year, 2 new ACSs will begin a term of responsibility. The general medical character of the firms will be jealously guarded. If one defines primary care as continuous and comprehensively integrated care, then such is the appropriate label for much of that provided by the firms. Victor McKusick.
Last year, I received an email from a division director of general internal medicine at a university hospital in Norway. And he wrote to me to ask how it was that I was able to convince the institution to adopt general internal medicine wards as the basis of the residency program. And I wrote back, I told him I had to laugh because Osler had devised things that way 100 years ago, and it had been confirmed several times over the succeeding generations. So I had the good luck of becoming a GIM division director in a place that has general internal medicine at its heart.
Well, the house staff was divided into quarters instead of halves, so that was much more manageable. I mentioned the economics of it. The assistant chief of service, with Dr. McKusick being the chief of service, was a faculty position. It was envisioned as a 2-year job. So at the first 4 ACSs, 2 of them did 2 years. And then the idea was that they kind of leapfrog over time. Turned out the job was about as hard as ours was. It was just unrealistic. Ken Boffman, Craig Smith were the first 2 that did 2 years. I think there were only 2 others, one other pair that did 2 years.
When the firm system was founded, one of the pressures was, of course, that the service had just merged and by definition doubled in 1 short year. What were called DRGs, that is disease coding systems, were being developed to facilitate reimbursement. The whole issue of patient insurance was becoming a big national issue, and we felt that.
It was in the midst of my internship that the firm system was announced. This upset me to the degree that I seriously contemplated leaving the Johns Hopkins Hospital. My concern being that the new system, with an increased presence of the ACS, would minimize my responsibility and ultimately my education. James C. Wade.
In the early years, there was some resistance from the interns and residents to having that kind of person above them. So it took special kinds of people to make that work.
But there were many such challenges that were faced. Yet, in spite of that, we remained focused. We were able to remain focused with the support of the faculty on the patients and maintaining our relationship with the patients, and as an ACS, our relationship with the house staff, which was clearly the biggest challenge and the greatest source of gratification.
I'll talk with them too, because I'm curious if that's the reason why she misses the block appointments that we make for her.
Yeah, because
Maybe
she
she
already
goes
has
there.
So I agree with no HCTZ. That I think either you could do twice a day beta blocker. The nice thing about Toprol XLs is a more gentle onset, so it doesn't give you sort of a rapid onset, so that's nice. But you could do twice a day instead, split it out to have more even coverage, or you could add Hydral. I worry about doing a TID medicine in her, or even doing Hydral BID, but why don't we do her Toprol XL's 200?
Yeah.
Why don't we do Metope 100 BID and see what happens? Okay. And then she can go home today.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, great. Let's rock and roll. Mr. Merrick's, how are you?
I'm doing good.
It's good to see you. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, you recognize everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Dr. Klein's going to tell us your story, and as you see, you're famous now. So I think the heart of our method of teaching is trying to take inexperienced people with a lot of knowledge and give them a lot of experience and couple that with even more knowledge to make them seasoned, capable, and unafraid or unperturbable, which is the meaning of Equanimitas that we talk about a lot.
So the four characteristics that that are really important to look for in an ACS include clinical excellence, leadership, the ability to inspire, and equanimitas.
Imperturbability means coolness and presence of mind under all circumstances, calmness amid storm, clearness of judgment in moments of grave peril. The physician who has the misfortune to be without it, who betrays indecision and worry, and who shows that he is flustered and flurried in ordinary emergencies, loses rapidly the confidence of his patients. William Osler.
That's what's on the tie. That's what's on our pins. Men will wear the tie every Friday. Women will wear the scarves every Friday. Pins we now give to graduating seniors, and they wear it on their white coats or their lapels. And it's also all over. And so many of the items that we give to people will have emblazoned upon them Equanimitas.
Being a Canadian, he was eligible for and became knighted, sir. And I guess when you get that, you have to come up with a coat of arms. So he and his son, Revere, designed that. Well, when Dr. McKusick was trying to come up with a pattern for the tie, they looked at that coat of arms. There's a lot of detail in there. So they decided to go with just a simple shield with Equanimitas.
And it captures the essence of what we value in physicians coming through this program, which is really that leadership and that imperturbability in situations of chaos and bringing calmness to the current situation.
I think the ACS tries to model what we think are core values at Johns Hopkins, but also do them in a way that is respectful of their colleagues, of patients, of nurses, and give the highest level of medical care in addition to learning facts and doing a daily job.
I think the moments that I've been proudest of is when I know that my interns and residents feel safe, that they are smart, and that they're able to do what they know is right for a patient without needing even my approval or my input. And seeing them become independent is really the goal of your ACS year.
skills that we would want to develop to deter what you really need to know as a clinician or a physician when you're encountered with a really sick patient is just that. Who's sick and who is not acutely sick. And that is invaluable because whether you're inpatient or outpatient physician, that is a skill set you need to know. You need to be able to walk into a room and say this patient is really ill and unstable. And learning that is invaluable. And you do that as you grow through your internship year. At the end of the year, if my interns could walk in and say, oh, I'm worried about this person, even if just by look alone they weren't that ill, then that's invaluable.
I think the learning aspect, there's a teaching portion and there's a learning portion. I think part of the learning aspect is knowing what you don't know from a book knowledge standpoint, but what you can teach, and you do know. And I think part of what we were always taught early on was that the most important thing to know when you go to the bedside of a patient is to know whether that patient is sick or not sick immediately. There are a lot of things that you can look up. There are a lot of people out there, probably some of my interns have more encyclopedic knowledge than I do about medicine and can name triads and pentads. But more importantly, I feel like one of the greatest parts of teaching and of learning is that, which has evolved for me over time, is that if you sit down with the patient long enough, they will tell you what's wrong. They may not know the name of it. They may not know what to do for it, but they will tell you in some way, shape, or form what is wrong with them. And I think that's what's most important. It's important to confer to a young mind, listen, and you'll know.
The hardest part of the ACS year is learning to multitask and wear a lot of different hats. And by that I mean being a good clinician, a good educator, a parent, an administrator, and doing that while you're trying to be a good role model for everyone. And that is a challenge, but at the end of the year, the growth that you have as an individual is unbelievable.
What's not challenging, and I think we're very lucky, because what's not challenging is finding the 4 people who have these skills, is deciding amongst the many people who have these characteristics which 4 we think would be best to have this position. And again, we feel very fortunate that every year, year upon year, the most difficult task is deciding amongst the group of people that have all of these characteristics and more, who do we think would be best to serve in the position of ACS.
I think one of the most rewarding aspects, again, is kind of like that family feel and just having one of the best jobs, I imagine, in the country.
When you start in July, everyone is uncomfortable. Nobody knows exactly what they're doing, and there's a lot to teach in the mornings. And then you reach a point where you're not teaching much in the mornings because people are doing so much more.
I remember this one intern that we had, Elizabeth Holt, who's an amazing physician, and it was October, and we were having so many admissions, we were getting slammed, and she was swamped, and she had this one patient that was transferred from surgery that was so complicated and required just so much TLC.
For me, this was Jenny Price, and I'll still remember the morning, but who is a phenomenal physician, and she had a night, which is the night that all interns dread having, where you admit 6 or 7 very, very sick and complicated patients. And when we come in the morning, you get a sense of what the acuity was overnight, and you're nervous.
And she kept that patient alive, and it was just an amazing feat of clinical care. And she took it, she was going to do it, and she did it, despite the fact that she was getting 6 admissions every night. It was amazing. The surgeons were just flabbergasted.
And as Jenny started to present, and as you sat and you listened, you realized by the end of the morning that every single thing that should have been done was done. Not only the big things, but every I was dotted, every T was crossed, and in a way that not only kept patients safe and advanced their health, but also in a way that would bring evidence into the plan and teach others why she chose to do things that particular way. And it's an amazing experience to know that, in July, everybody started at the same spot, and now in the winter, Jenny's able to do this. And you feel proud, you feel inspired, and you realize that this system works.
Being an ACS has, for me, been essentially a series of incredibly proud moments where I took a group of people that I already thought the world of and have watched them excel at what they do and become even better.
And you see the interns go from, the deer in the headlamps look on July 1st to, tossing off 6 admissions without breaking a sweat and getting everything right, as the year goes through. And watching that transformation is pure gold, and I love doing that. I loved my interns. It was a great, great group.
It's a very, very special relationship, I think, between an ACS and their house staff, and it's one that continues lifelong. So Sanjay said at the beginning of this year, for the rest of their lives, your interns will say, Laurel Brown was my ACS. Make sure that's a statement that you're proud of.
I have an award at home, which I have very proudly displayed in my office, that the house staff gave me my second year, which was the Mother of the Year award.
I feel like a proud mama at many times, and in fact, my interns even call me Mama Bear because I feel so proud of them and let them know.
You're going through it, you can't explain it, and you'll have those bonds forever.
I loved my fellow ACSs, and we'd get back to the office and it'd be 11 or midnight, and we'd have to do these dictations, and Lon Whitstein, who's a cardiologist still here at Hopkins, would just say the right things to crack us up, and when you're there and you see these amazing friends and colleagues going through the same thing, it was all right.
I guess the the evening rounds that I would make with the house staff, I'd go home for dinner, so I'd be with my wife and very young child at the time, and then come back to the hospital and begin rounds, usually around 8 or 9 o'clock, and that would go till midnight usually. So I'd spend 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes more, with each of my group of house staff. And we had fun talking about patients, talking about life. I got to know them very well. I think that's probably, in retrospect, what I valued most about the experience.
It was the most rewarding professional year of my life. And that's because of the ability to participate in the development and mentorship of 10 to 12 unbelievably passionate and ambitious people who want to change, literally want to change medicine, is an amazing opportunity.
The Osler service gives us an opportunity to learn about patients, about disease, the spectrum of disease, the presence of a given disease in the context of multiple comorbidities. It teaches you to develop clinical judgment so that one is not dependent solely on cookbook medicine and algorithms. And I think that understanding that is fostered among our house staff is one of the attributes that the service brings to doctors in training that serves their patients very well.
It turns out the only way to get an Osler tie is to be an Osler intern. So I thought I would never have one. And until 4 years ago, I attended a reunion of Osler house staff, and as I was leaving, I got a tie and a gift bag as I was leaving. And I thought to myself, am I really part of the team? Did they mean to give this to me? So I called the following week, and I was told, oh no, you weren't supposed to get that. Please bring it right back. Yeah, so what's the best firm? Well, I think there's absolutely no question about that.
Oh, that's a loaded question. Right now, I'm firm faculty at Long Cove, so I have to say that. So it depends on what time of life you ask me that question.
Having been Barker firm, it's clear that Barker is the best of the firms.
Thayer. Second Janeway. Third Barker. Last Long Cove. Sorry, all you Long Copers.
I'd be split between the two that I was part of, and now I can't commit allegiance. I'm dedicated to them all.
It's the firm of giants, Janeway.